Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last installment of my LinkedIn Live series for 2021. Expect the unexpected. And today my guest is Courtney Abercrombie, founder and CEO of AI Truth. Courtney, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Great. Let's get started. So, Courtney, you have a huge passion around responsible AI, and so do I. And it's been a theme throughout this entire year around, this kind of awakening of the risks associated with AI and the fact that we need to really focus on the tenets of what is responsible AI. And one of the things that I focus on is, getting it done, right, versus admiring the problem. And but I wanted to get your perspective, right, on where the industry is. I mean, you speak with so many different leaders in the data science area and the analytics area. Where do you see different organizations from a maturity perspective? From the beginning of just becoming aware of the issues to organizations that have frameworks in place and governance in place to manage their responsible AI development.
I think you have it right in that we're all looking at these principles and we all have so many different versions of these things. I think, who was it? Harvard went through an exercise to outline all the different principles, and there was like over 1,000 or something to this effect. The Berkman Klein Center, I think, put that together. And I mean, so this is complex, and people are just like, just trying to deal with AI, and machine learning capabilities. Let's just face it. When we say AI, Scott, we're really talking about a narrow version, which is really machine learning capabilities, just different complexities of machine learning capabilities right now,
Yeah.
but mostly just, machine learning, which is a very close cousin to predictive analytics. It just kind of more on steroids, but then there are definitely much more complex versions of that. But in my mind, I think most companies are immature still with their machine learning and AI capabilities. So to ask them whether or not they're actually mature in their responsible AI is, I think, there's not many.
There's not many. Well,
I mean, we're all trying, though.
Yeah.
We're all trying.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's a good point, right? Because I recall, like, the Telegraph or someone, they published something, that a statistic that an overwhelming majority of companies that say that they do AI, right, don't actually do AI, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think this framework of education around, okay, what is our definition of AI? What are the models within, and what are the relative risks of those models are probably really fundamental for every organization to map out. I mean, I'm kind of, I saw an article about EU AI regulation, right? And they were kind of begging the question whether statistical models should fit into that guise, or is it only machine learning models? So, yeah, I think it's interesting to understand the depths of where the maturity of each organization is.
Well, because anything that gets automation applied to it, we're looking at, and I'm talking about, the robotic process automation that, some of it is intelligent as well, right? But anytime you start to want to take humans out of the loop is my main point, regardless of which type of intelligent automation are you talking, because you can get in the same conversation in terms of AI and machine learning. You can have the same conversation on the robotic process automation front too, which is how intelligent is your automation? There's rules-based things, just like we have statistics-based things. And then there's the intelligent version where it can go fully autonomous. And that's where I think things get really scary in terms of what is this thing going to do once it's let loose, once it continues to learn. I think this is the part where we have to ensure that humans really know what this thing actually is learning, what the capability is that you've set up. What is it actually learning, and being able to check in and truly have humans in the loop. I really think that's key.
Agreed, right? And one of the things that I really think is important, and I've seen you talk about it a number of times, and I really like it. I mean, and I frame it up as the plight of the data scientist, right? Because the people that know what the dangers are sometimes buried very deep within an organization, maybe not even having proper air cover or structure within an organization in terms of standards of ethical AI or standards of reporting. So well, what's your advice maybe for organizations that are looking to bring that together, right? Where we make sure that everyone has a full view of what that kind of risk profile would look like, and not just the poor data scientists who might be sitting there feeling unheard, right? Or their points not being well appreciated.
Yeah, I know. I call them the abused data scientists. But I mean, and a lot of people go, what? This is like the sexiest job of the century and all this kind of stuff. What are you talking about, abused data scientists? But in some cases, and let's just, be frank, when we're talking about, some of these use cases, these are really high stakes use cases. I know there could be some people from retail or other places listening in, and maybe their exposure to machine learning is more of A/B testing kind of concept or something, where it doesn't carry the weight of someone's job or someone's livelihood. Like, with FICO, you guys are in everything. I mean, I can't even tell you how many things, data scientists will even use FICO sometimes as a proxy for responsible behavior in general, even in driving. And so the pressures you guys must feel, I can't even imagine. But we're talking about high stakes type of machine learning capabilities. And this is the hard part, because a lot of high stakes machine learning capabilities actually are built in little pods all over the company. So they are built for everyone from a chief digital officer to a chief marketing officer who may want some really fantastic AI social media command center. And, the way that we impact kids, we've seen with Instagram, for example, or even just the types of campaigns that we can run can actually have a very deeply psychological effect. So even things that seem inane also are very impactful, and not the least of which is our financial well-being, right? Because we all want and we feel worth based on how much money we can procure and the kind of lifestyle that a lot of us can lead. And maybe it sounds a little bit shallow on the surface, but really, I mean, truly, here we are at Christmas. Why are we all running around and trying to get so many gifts, right? We need money to do the things that we want to do in life. And if something is biased against us and carries that huge impact, we need to know how is that impacting us, and do we have as individuals a sense of agency in that process? And one of the great things you didn't ask me to make this into the FICO show, but one of the things that FICO has long actually had to do is show people, right, how they get their scores and what's weighted. I checked mine the other day, and it was talking about, hey, you've got so many different open lines of credit here. This is probably going to impact you, and it gave me a little warning. And I was like, hey, that's great. How many companies can say the same thing about the way that they're labeling individuals today? And how would they know? And how do they even, when you ask someone, where in your company do you go to make sure that your AI is inclusive? They don't have good answers. And the reason, Scott, coming right back around to my original answer, was because it's everywhere inside of a company, and they're working with outside vendors. It's not just internal to the company. We've got external stakeholders that are actually building these things, and they're being brought in with the company and sometimes merged with the data science teams inside of a company. But the bottom line is, I don't think companies, if you ask the CEO all the different AI initiatives that are going on that are high stakes, they may or may not be able to tell you where in the company those are happening, because they're seen as a how to get things done, right?
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. And, I think that the concept of the pods, and I like to call them analytic city-states, right, are really, really important, right? Because you can imagine that, it's so complex, right? And if every pod or analytic city-state has its own sort of view on what its responsibility is from responsible AI, and it might be at odds with other sort of pods, right? It's very difficult to institute a corporate-wide sort of standard. And you mentioned, for example, the fact that we try to make sure, right, with every AI and we do machine learning model, that we can explain it, and we have interpretable technology so that the consumer, that the person that gets that score, has a view to what is driving that score. That comes through strong kind of corporate governance around how we develop models and standards. And Yeah, I think it's one of these things where, we have the competing sort of aspects of, the commercial aspects, right? Where, time to market might be the number one priority, and the risk that one takes they may take larger risks versus having sort of a corporate governance standard around the machine learning development. Well, it would be the natural sort of check and balance against, let's say, market-driven sort of direction, or maybe over exuberance around the amount of risk that an organization wants to take. I think it's super important, and I know that it's something that maybe leads me to my next question, right? Which is, do you think, as we look at the landscape in 22, do you think that government will help us with all this, right? I mean, in terms of frameworks to kind of hasten in the age of documentation and standards and auditing of these AI and machine learning methodologies?
I think right now the people in the government aspect in those areas that could actually help us the most at this point are trying to lead with an example. But we can always, and some people out there will be very cynical about, right, the government's going to lead with example. But there are different departments within the government who have long known about AI and machine learning capabilities and have long been engineers and experts in that area that are trying to do responsible machine learning. And so what I was going to say is, I think we have a better chance of the government trying to lead by example in certain areas. Like we've seen the JAIC, the Joint AI Council, I believe is what it's called, but it falls under, I believe, the Department of Defense, if I'm not mistaken. And so a lot of people will automatically question, well, could anything out of the Department of Defense? I'm not questioning it, but I've heard. So, I mean, the credibility factor, I guess, is one area. But of trying to lead by example, will we see regulations? I think our challenge here, Scott, comes back to what you were saying early on in this LinkedIn Live, which is how much do people actually know? Do our legislators know enough about machine learning capabilities? Do they know enough of the experts out there to bring in, even to really truly begin to grasp what kinds of laws and policies need to be passed? That's where I think, unfortunately, and fortunately, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. We have business leaders who are trying to step in and help the government understand and help the legislators understand how these things work. I think we all saw that moment when we watched them interrogate Facebook, and they were like, well, how do you make your money? And it's like, they don't know a whole lot about some of this technology stuff, I think. There are some who do know, and they've written books about it. But for the most part, I would say we have a lot of legislators that don't know about this stuff, and they don't know enough about this stuff. And a lot of them feel intimidated because they're just like our lawyers are really trying to grasp, well, how do we, in this day and age, with the laws that we have right now, how do we kind of help businesses in the right direction on these AI paths when we don't even know ourselves what this stuff really does? So it's an education. Do I see us coming like around like the EU has? I don't know. It remains to be seen, because the GDPR has been around a while, and yet we only see one or two states that have even passed true data privacy laws. We see some states that have passed biometric data laws, but have we really been following suit with the EU? No. Do we think that, wholesale so far not. So I don't know if regulations are coming. I kind of hope they are, because just like you were saying, the environment of AI is this move fast and break things. That's because it came out of the development world, right? And agile, which is another process orientation that we all expect. In agile, it's kind of a norm, an unspoken norm. In 6 to 8 weeks, you will show a stakeholder something, someone who has money inside your company, who's funding, might be a digital officer, might be someone who's making products, but you're going to show them something at the end of 6 to 8 weeks. Even if you have to beg, barter, borrow, steal the information from wherever you have to get it, you're going to show something. And that's where like 90% of what goes wrong in AI today or machine learning today, it's really around the data and how you bring it in, how you munge it, where you sourced it really. Also, when it comes to privacy. And I'll stop talking so you can actually say.
No, I agree with you exactly, right? I mean, I think, we have the advantage at FICO that we're a global company. And so from that perspective, we have to be aware of and abide by many different regulation, right? But things are slow here within the US at the federal level, right? Because some of the states, New York and California in general, right, are ahead of the game and continuing to look at that. And in fact, there's conversations right now in California around AI risk frameworks. And so I think, that's a positive step. And I think I'm always surprised with some of my conversations with peers, and I'll talk to some of them, and they'll say, "Well, listen, I don't think I have to be responsible with my AI, right?" And sometimes, depending on my relationship with them, I will kid and joke, and I'll say, "Well, when is it okay not to be ethical, right?"
Right.
I think it may take some of these sort of frameworks and regulation to actually move some people, into this sort of same level of standard, right, in terms of how business works. But yeah, certainly in this VC funded startup age of, get to the next round at all costs is not conducive with responsible and proper ways of developing, machine learning. And, we lose sight of this. And I've written a couple articles about it. AI and machine learning allows the users to become tremendously calloused in their decision making, because somehow this superhuman omniscient AI has made a decision, right? But the reality, right? The machine learning models make a lot of mistakes, and that's why interpretability and understanding of how it gets made is something that needs to be passed on to, along with levels of maybe uncertainty, to the people that are making the decisions, so we don't become calloused. And I think that's the one of the big challenges is callousness around the fact that it's math, right, or it's machine learning, or it's a GPU created model. But at the end of the day, I think it's not conducive for treating people properly. And I think the data aspect is important, right? If the consumers in control of their data, they might speak with whom they allow their data to be accessed by, and that may also be another forcing function on that. On regulation.
Yeah. Exactly. And even if they can have the ability, just even transparency, let's say you can't get to explainability, it's just too hard or whatever. Even if the least you could do was provide transparency around the data elements themselves and what is at least, one of the, at a high level, explains some of the key components that go in. Maybe you don't have to do it dynamically like FICO does, which is pretty amazing. But even if you, as a company, you could put some sort of transparency that says, this is the types of data that we're pulling in to make these considerations about you as a person. If as an individual, hey, that's based on old data. Like, I can't even tell you, my daughter is now 16 today.
Oh, happy birthday.
Yeah. Oh my God. No, everybody in Texas warned now, if you're listening, don't get on the streets. But anyway, but she, it's like, I still get baby formula stuff every now and then. And I'm like, what on earth? These people need to update their data. Where did they get this stuff from? But sometimes people are using, I joke about that kind of stuff, but it gets serious when you're actually using like cached Twitter feeds, for example, from some data broker that you're not really that familiar with, but you were once again time constrained and budget constrained. So you went with this budget data person that gave you this old cached Twitter feed that you then used to help make some kind of AI and hiring, recruitment, sentiment analysis, or something, something like that. Or maybe they even have like, FICO was too expensive for the data for us to buy right off the bat. So we just went and bought this, some person that provided us with the scores from like 50 years ago. And it's like, yeah, but someone wouldn't be the same in the same stage of their life as they would be over here. But yet we don't allow enough time, and we don't allow enough of, we don't have actual bookmarked places in the agile processes that we use to develop our AI solutions. We don't have bookmarks in there to say, hey, it's time, raise your objections. This is the moment. Junior data scientists are the ones I encounter the most who will raise the objections because they don't, they haven't become hardened to the processes, right, of being knocked down, blacklisted, or whatever things could occur. And so, I mean, I would personally love to see, even if all that a company did, all that a marketing officer who has $2 million to spend on an AI solution, even if all they did was come in and say, I want to know what were the objections and when, and I want there to be a space in the process for this, to make objections, and I want to know what they were and how much they cost to overcome at each step.
Yeah.
Tell me that. Even that could change how responsible a company is with their AI.
It could. Yeah, absolutely. Asking those questions. And I think, this is one of the things, we don't talk about empathy much, right? But, putting ourselves in the seats of those that are getting a decision based on a score, to the point you made, right? Being able to say, listen, this is the reason why your score is the way it is. It comes back to this data and this sort of behavior, right? And most people are tremendously reasonable. They can look at that and say, okay, I understand that this activity I did caused my score to not be as good, right? But if we're not going to be able to trace it back to something that the consumer, the person that is getting a decision against, can understand, can remediate when wrong, right? When the data is out of date or the provenance isn't correct, I think it's it's going to be very, very difficult, right? And I think those are the standards that have to be put in place, right? If you put into place, listen, I want to make sure that I can, trace back to the data elements that are driving the decision, so that a consumer can remedy that, right? With a view that, I always talk about data in an interesting way. I like to talk about it as a liability with sometimes providing some value, right? And if we think about data in that aspect, right? I mean, I think it would change the viewpoint. The other thing I think, to talk about where we're headed, right? One thing that I have hope for, I don't know, I'll ask your opinion on it, is around self-regulation or organizational regulation. So, last week, Friday, we were hit with another zero-day event in the cyber world. And it just brings me to think about, the different ISACs, right? The industry-based cybersecurity organizations that focus on industry standards, right? So if it's too much to boil the ocean with an overall arching sort of regulation, maybe that the financial services environment will come up with their own regulation, right? And say, this is the way that we choose to deal with responsible AI, or what we think to be the standards of how we do this. And, I was very pleased this year to see the IEEE 7000 guidance come out, right? Which, I'll just paraphrase it. I encourage anyone that's listening to go read it, right? But essentially, it's talking about, building it to a sufficient level of detail where you don't overdo it, right? You basically build it to a point where it's well designed. You build it to a point that it is explainable and responsible. And it's okay if you don't try to maximize every little ounce of predictive power, because it's all kind of like it's all kind of fake, right? Because all that turns into overtraining, it turns into bias issues and ethical issues. So I see hope there. I guess what I'd ask is, do you see the same thing? Do you think organizations like healthcare and retail and financial and power utility, oil exploration, whatever else it is, right, nuclear, whatever's out there, that as a group will come together and say, these are the standards that we're going to try to operate underneath? Do you think that's a move in 2022?
I have two answers for that. in true consulting type fashion, right? Never just a yes or no. I think it's complex because we're talking about a lot of different industries, and I think that it depends on two factors, really: how new the thing is that we're talking about, and how standardized it is as a thing itself. So like self-driving cars, that's pretty darn new. Finances and scoring of people, that's been around for a while. So I think that's a little more mature just by nature. You understand all of the data and the flows of data better. Whereas something like a self-driving car, that's something so new. The impact is the second thing I was going to say. The high stakes. How high stakes is this? So, is this someone's life or death? Self-driving cars would be a yes. You could, if someone decides they want to just set it on fully autonomous, even though it says you need to be, quote unquote, how many people saw the Massachusetts drivers that were literally asleep while they're being driven down the going 55 miles an hour down the highway by their car. Yeah, the thing is that when you have high stakes, I really hope that, and it's new, I really hope you will, but I don't have much faith that when something's a new kind of thing, a new industry, like a self-driving car industry, I don't know how much we're going to see standards yet coming out of there, because they're changing the standards of what they're doing constantly to adapt to their current situations. That being said, that's why I say the newer, which that's what worries me about AI in general, is that we have a lot of new areas, not finance per se. I feel like banking, I used to work at Citi as well. And, I feel like banking has always had a good grasp of what it takes to bring all of the different credit bureau information together. Back in the day, that was like our first big data stuff, right? Bringing the 3 different credit bureaus together and munging those, and then trying to figure out who's credit worthy and how credit worthy and all that good stuff. And I'm speaking for myself, not Scott. But I mean, that's just how we did it, like literally 30 years ago or 20 years ago. And now we're talking about, well, can we actively work in people's lifestyles? Can we open up the aperture to understand how much more risk, but a person can be looked at in a different way, so that it's not just a financial statement, it's a have you been responsible in your life kind of statement, and that way we can give you credit based on that. Because I know you've talked about, how can we open that up to more people and make it less biased that way. And I love that, because you're being creative about how you're approaching this. Will we see standards though? The new ones, I don't think so. The new industries, probably not. The more mature industries that have a better handle, yes. And I hope we will. I mean, I hope it just continues and continues and continues, because what you guys are selling is trust. If people don't have trust in your products, which I do hope, the more we see that the Teslas of the world are having accidents, we don't want to see ourselves being that driver that gets in that accident. And so I hope that consumers will push on the new nascent AI areas to get them to adopt better standards. I hope that will be a thing. I think in the more mature ones, I think you already are, and it's already regulated too, in addition to that.
Yeah, and you make a great point, Courtney, because I recently got a great opportunity to do a keynote at one of our customers' internal data science conferences, and they asked me a quote about why should we be excited in the financial services space. And I think one of the things that I'm most proud of is working in the financial services areas is just the level of maturity and deep thought that's already there. And maybe we have to wrap it up, but maybe as we look to 22, right? Maybe we'll see more of these cross-industry sort of sharing, right? Where we take a lot of maturity and best practices from, let's say, the financial services space and all the great work that's done there, and maybe it informs other industries. So, maybe that's one of the things that I'll look for. Courtney, it's been great. It's great to spend time with you speaking. I look forward to continuing the conversations with you in 22. For those that are listening and still interested about what the future looks like, feel free to check out my 2022 predictions on the FICO blog, and stay tuned for next LinkedIn Lives. I've really enjoyed this, and thank you again, Courtney.
Thanks for having me, Scott. It's been great.